Hello from Sydney, and welcome to the Proof of Concept podcast, where we explore real life use cases from the field and discuss some of the hottest questions in the field of data science and AI today. And as always, I am your host, Grant Case, Director of Sales Engineering here for Dataiku and ANZ. And as always, is my co host up there in Singapore. Hello, Alex Hubert.
Hey Grant, how are you?
I'm jazzed and pumped for today because let's get ready to rumble. Today is all about the data science language breakdown. So let's get lots of comments coming on this one.
Yeah,
So
I would
today
expect so.
we're going to be talking about, the data science languages and how we typically break those down. So let's kind of introduce the participants and what is the cool stuff we can do with the technology, Alex?
Yeah, so when you think data science language, right, you just open up Google and you're gonna have those big debates between obviously Python and R. Then pretty quickly SQL is gonna come around, and the kind of cool stuff that you do with Python. Because I'm more of a Python person than R person. I'm not sure that R should still be around, but anyway.
Oh, this is going to be fun.
But the cool stuff you do with Python now is I was actually about to say anything that is machine learning related, but Python is so much more than that, right? You have all those libraries that let you do stuff from web apps, pretty nice visualization, heavy manipulation of data, and obviously machine learning, right? And ultimately, if you know your way around Python, you can go from building the backend of the website, putting some AI in your website, and even building somewhat some web apps on your website. Everything with Python, and that's the full end-to-end cycle and the full end-to-end dream of a data scientist, right? Getting from raw data to an actual product that everyone can see. That's something you can do with Python. I will let you comment on how.
So I will take the R and the SQL. I'm an old hat. I love R as a language. I teach it in class. But one of the cool things I really like about R and always has is, in effect, anytime you go to most languages, you start up, you cook up, open up your Google browser or your Google Chrome, you type in, and here comes a big deal, big list of answers from Stack Overflow. The one thing I've always enjoyed about, especially about R, is the amount of community spirit in R. And the libraries, we talk about like the ubiquitousness of the scikit-learn library inside of Python. It is the coin of the realm when it comes to machine learning. But anything that you've ever thought about doing, somebody has likely built a function in a package in R today. I can go out to CRAN, I could do a search, I likely will find it, and there's a function there that I can just call and do it myself. I don't have to, I'm not taking and doing a bunch of code to get it out. So for me, especially anything, and I'm trying to do anything statistical related, R is always the go-to for
Yeah.
those particular pieces. But the one that we always get kind of short shifted, but it is the cockroach of all programming
I
languages, and
wouldn't
that
call
is,
it a cockroach.
oh,
Come
I
on.
would. It is
You can't call
SQL.
SQL. You can't call SQL a cockroach.
It's not a
SQL is
cockroach.
so
Yeah.
useful.
It is
It is
useful,
so
and it will be
useful.
around for, after you or I are long gone. Like if I was putting on, if you're taking bets of the language that'll be used now in 2050, so almost over 30 years from now, I can
SQL
guarantee you somebody will be writing SQL at that point in time.
for sure. For
R
sure.
and Python might be gone, but yes. So for me, SQL has almost had a renaissance, right? So there was a time in the previous, the last decade where, you know,
It wasn't
RDMS
cool.
is too slow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it wasn't cool to do SQL
wasn't
anymore.
cool.
And you're right. It's the renaissance of SQL because people realize that um, when you go raw data to data in a database at some point, whatever type of database that you have, you're going to have to manipulate heavily at scale those massive data sets so that your analytics team can start working with it. But all those pipeline, it's heavy SQL pipeline. And even
Mhm.
on the analytics side, like, okay, it's great to do stuff in Python. Like the number of times, like I was taught that myself when I joined Data Echo in the first place. Like I knew that Python was slow, but I didn't know how powerful SQL was. And then after that, I was teaching that to a couple of my team members. Guys, just do that in SQL. It's so much more powerful. It's so useful, and it's also robust. In Python,
Yes.
you can make a lot of mistakes, and like you're gonna have some weird errors because that package was updated and stuff like that. You didn't catch it. SQL will still probably be the syntax can change from one database to another one, but overall, pretty easy to maintain, very robust, and so efficient in processing data in a database.
Yeah. So how do we explain these languages out to our CEO? So how do we Eli 5 uh, these different languages? And I guess I'll kick off.
Yeah.
When it comes to R, think about all of the statistics you might have needed to do at some point in time. Uh, Most likely, it has its basis somewhere within the R language, especially if it's happened within the last 20 years. If I am looking for a language that I need to get something done and iterate very, very quickly, that's where R comes in.
Yeah. And overall, whether it's R, whether it's Python, whether it's SQL, the way I would explain the need for a data science language to a CEO, an executive, or whatever, it's really what's going to be driving innovation and giving you the flexibility to test things, drive innovation, integrate with other systems. You can't just look at innovation and innovation around data just as a siloed system that just lives by itself. It has to be integrated in other stuff, and then the code start to become that glue between different systems. It's also just the projection of the human mind. Like there's a lot of stuff you can do with low code solution, of course, and they're getting stronger and stronger weeks after weeks, years after years. Like I think a couple of days ago, I read that Bubble, it's a complete no code solution, not really in the analytics space, but they've raised 100 million in Series A. That just shows
Series,
how much
wow.
in Series A. Yeah, that just shows how much low code, the future of low code solution is amazing. But at the same time, you can't deny that behind, first of all, any low code solution, you have some code that does the magic behind. And
And
when
that
you're
magic's
trying,
probably Python.
probably, I think in the case of Bubble, I heard the CEO once in a podcast. It does a lot of JavaScript stuff, but again,
Uh,
that makes sense considering
another
what they do. Another one.
another language
Another
that
one that
always it has had something of a renaissance as of late. And then, what are your favorite languages? We'd love to hear from you. Please leave us the comment on LinkedIn or here on the video on YouTube. So, and also subscribe to our channel here. We'd love to hear your feedback. Uh, yeah, so I think kind of let's compare and contrast a little bit. We kind of did that already to start with, but I think ultimately when we are comparing and contrasting, what is your thoughts? I mean, is it really? Are we going to Python seems to take everything, right? But is there a space? Should we be thinking about other languages as well?
This compare and contrast is interesting, right? I wouldn't want to do a compare and contrast between languages. I think I opened the door between low code and code because ultimately, as you say, like I used to work in the finance industry, and R was extremely useful. Statistical perspective, time series analysis, it was extremely useful. And comparing different languages amongst themselves is not exactly fair because you're going to use a language for different purpose. If you want to do some, once again, heavy data manipulation at scale in database, that's going to be SQL. If you want to do something that is much closer to the customer, to the end user, probably you're going to be using JavaScript. If you want to have that Swiss Army knife that does a little bit of everything and a lot of machine learning, you're going to be using Python. All of them have their different purposes. Now, the real compare and contrast is, what do you want people to do in your organization? Do you want them to drive complex use cases, complex innovation? And in that case, at some point, you need to quickly realize that low-code solution probably won't be able to bring you to the next level. Again, it depends on the use case, depends on what you're trying to do. But at some point, you're going to need the expertise and the flexibility that a complete code framework give you. But otherwise, a low-code solution is completely fine. You can do a lot of stuff. You can do a lot of stuff with a low-code solution. So the real question to me, the real compare and contrast is low-code or no-code. So
Yeah.
sorry, code or low-code.
So here's a good question for a data leader. How can you have all of these languages in your team? I mean, aren't we ultimately, when we're talking about this, we always like to talk about how do you save money, make money, improve the customer experience,
Yep.
especially if you're starting to, manage these multiple languages within one team or one organization. Ultimately, are you going to be increasing the cost associated with it?
You might increase the complexity, obviously. Like if you
Mhm.
have some people coding in R, others coding in Python, and I was talking earlier on of the need to integrate different systems together. Well, you can guess that if one is coded in Python, the other one in R, at some point it's going to be complicated for the two pipeline to be reconciled. There's good solution for that, like that Haiku, for instance. Uh, but yeah, like it's true that you're taking the risk to increase the complexity, and on the long run, that can increase cost of maintaining those pipeline, maintaining the code. If you have like the governance essentially all around that can be pretty tedious. If
Mhm.
tomorrow I'm losing an R expert, how long does that going to take me to find another R expert? Probably, not that long. But then how long that person is going to take to understand that code logic, um, so that it becomes second nature, like it's almost me who has written that code. That can take a long time, and managing that complexity is something you also have to keep in mind when you're trying to grow a team, and therefore growing some skill set within your team. Like how are you going to manage that on the long run? At some point, and we see people actually taking the decision to say, we're just going to be a Python shop,
Mhm.
or we're just going to be like a complete Spark shop, and because that's going to remove a little bit of that complexity. In practice, you see more Python SQL,
Mhm.
something like this.
Yeah. And I think, Justin, when we I like to talk about these, and I like to think about opportunity cost. What is the opportunity cost associated with not doing something? So in this case, if I'm not hiring someone who's an R or Python person, in the fact that, like you said, I do know those organizations that we're doing all Spark. We do not want to manage other languages. We're going to do everything in Spark, and that's fine. But there is an opportunity cost associated there when you only make one decision across the team. And to be fair, I see a lot of organizations, a fair bit of organizations going kind of this siloed, we're going to do Python only. But if you look, the vast majority of most organizations today are, and the customers I work with, it's more about the person, right? You'll see most times, I'm an R person, uh, slowly learning Python at this point. But I think if you have the mentality of typically the individuals who learn these types of languages, uh, moving over to another language inside of the organization is always helpful.
Yeah.
And that's growing your own capacity as an organization and your own talent pool. So for me, it's not so much about saving money or making money when it comes to choosing a language. It's what can I get the most out of my team?
And
Because, yeah,
it's an excellent point because it's you can see anyway that that trend of organization proposing career path, but also trainings, upskilling people. Like you have all those boot camps within organization to take someone who didn't know how to code and then train them in SQL or in Python slowly, week after weeks. That goes exactly into the direction of what you were saying.
yeah. And again, I think I never want to necessarily hang and we when I was on the other side of the desk, I never wanted to constrain any of my team in terms of the language itself because guess what? Every language, you know, go back to, you know, you know, go back to 2000, 2001, Java, yeah, it's
Yeah,
still incredibly important now, but it was everywhere.
yeah,
Languages come and go, but the people and the aptitude to deal with the languages, those are the folks that drive the value.
yeah, definitely.
So let's talk a little bit. Let's put on our wizard's cap and let's think about some of the predictions in and around because there is a fair amount of organizations that are dipping their toe in today into this data science world, and th- you know there's always a fear of am I going to bet the wrong horse? So let's put on our prognosticator caps and let's kind of think about predictions as it relates to a lot of these data science languages.
Yeah, I mean, Python should be around, right?
Mhm.
Python is going to be around. But as we said earlier on in the episode, right? SQL for sure is going to be around, and if anything, it's less than a bet. But I would love to see organization trusting and relying much more of their pipelining and their feature engineering on SQL. There is so many data scientists right now in the market. I'm looking at their code sometimes. I'm looking at what they're doing, and I'm not going to say horrified, but sometimes that's sometimes
As a
the case.
former SQL developer, I will say that. I am
Sometimes
mortified.
you're looking at loops over loops over loops, and you're like, that would have been so much better and so much more efficient in SQL. So for sure, SQL is going to be around. But if we try to make a very meaningful prediction, I don't think again we should be asking ourselves which language is going to be around because language pop and go and maybe tomorrow something appears and it's the new Python and just replace everything. However, um, I think you're going to see more and more very powerful low code solutions on the long run
Mhm,
that are going to challenge the way we even think of innovation, the way that data scientists, data engineer are looking at their job right now. Potentially, data science is going to be much more of a managed services than what it is right now. Like we were talking about AutoML stuff last time. AutoML, it's the complete abstraction of the code. It's a low code solution. Like doesn't mean that you're useless as a data scientist, but
mhm,
we are putting the code away and yet the innovation is still being pushed forward.
mhm.
So I think we'll see a fair rebalancing of the dependence and the reliance on code to build analytics project
Mhm.
over the next few years.
Yeah, I think I echo some of those, especially when it comes to the languages themselves. I tell this story about you know, at the beginning of my career, I'd gone in and I had basically built my own little application with Microsoft Front Page, which was an HTML editor. I had gone into a job interview and basically they were like, "Oh, how'd you do this?" And I was like, "This." How did I do that? Well, uh, somebody just pulled up their notepad, not even Notepad plus plus at that point. And I think back to that, and I think about now the languages are still going to be around. Uh, the question will be how much of it is being used. To your point, low code and no code solutions, especially in data science, are getting really scary good.
Yeah.
So the amount of code I might need to write is actually going to shrink. Even though the ultimately I may be using more Python or I may be using more R later on, but that's as a percentage of the total amount of work, it's probably become smaller and smaller. So I look at, is Python going to continue to rule the roost? Absolutely. I don't see it going anywhere. I don't see R going anywhere either, especially here in Australia. I'd say R is probably on par in a lot of organizations with Python. But for me, it's more of that, what's going to happen in the next, 5 years. We're going to see we talk about this overall theme of democratization, and democratization is coming to a lot of the code. So we're going to
Yeah.
see this bifurcation of people that are doing a lot of low code, no code stuff, and maybe a little bit of Python or a little bit of R. And then you'll have your ML engineers on the other side that when I need to get that 0.1% better AUC, guess where I'm going? I'm going to open up the code.
Yeah.
And, and as you said earlier, what's around the corner? Julia as a programming language seems to be, very, very interesting. Gets rid of a lot of the problems we have with Python in terms of memory and speed, and replaces that. But, will that catch fire? Don't know. But I do know one thing. Somebody's going to be coding some part.
Question for you: when you the first workflows that you were building within Dataiku, within DSS, how much were they relying on code in comparison to what the amount of pure no code visual recipes that you're using?
90% low code, no code at that
But
point.
when you but when you started, was it more geared toward codes? Like, did you see that rebalance over time?
No. And I think that's the scary thing about all of this, especially for a lot of data scientists. It's like, okay, I can have something build the SQL pipeline for me. I don't have to write it. Maybe I could have written it a little bit better, but the cost savings in terms of time is always going to win out.
That is exactly my case. When I
Yeah.
started, I used to have, I would say, 80% of my pipelines were code-based. But then the more trust I was getting into the tool and into low-code solution, and like as you said, the productivity gain that you have out of this, now it's so much more rebalanced. It's more 70-30 than what it was at the beginning.
Yeah. Well, again, and we would love to hear your predictions in and around the languages. Are we going to see our new languages? Are you seeing new languages pop up? Are you seeing, what do you think about code in general? Are we going more towards a low code, no code era? We would love to hear your feedback here on the Proof of Concept podcast. So please subscribe on YouTube and drop us a link on LinkedIn, or drop us a comment on LinkedIn, and we would love to hear from you. So with that and wrapping up, Alex, I want to thank you for your discussions today. And I want to thank you for joining us, as everyone. And thanks for listening. Please stay tuned for upcoming episodes of the POC and follow us on LinkedIn. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and drop us some comments. We'd love to hear them. We'll play them back. So for that, Alex Hubert in Singapore and myself, Grant Case here in Sydney. Thanks so much. Take care and have a great day.